Welcome to Sleepy Scientist Stories. Tonight, you'll float alongside something rare, something quiet, something never seen before in human history. In 2017, a mysterious object passed silently through our solar system. It didn't orbit, it didn't return, it simply appeared, moved on, and vanished. Astronomers named it Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word meaning a messenger from afar, arriving first, and even now no one truly knows what it was. Tonight, we'll explore everything. We know every curious detail, every quiet theory, and maybe what it still refuses to tell us. It begins not with a flash, not with sound, not even with certainty, but with a whisper from the stars. You are drifting quietly through the deep, still dark of space, where nothing rushes and nothing surprises, where the sky holds its breath across impossible distances, and then something unfamiliar passes through, something not expected, not invited, and not entirely understood at first. It is only a flicker, a line of light moving far too fast, a glint caught in the survey of an ordinary sky. The kind astronomers scan routinely night after night, looking for the usual suspects: comets, asteroids, the small rocky travelers of our solar system. But this flicker is different. This object is already leaving when it is first seen, already on its way out, already past the sun, and heading toward the edge of everything we know. And this is where your journey begins, with an object that entered quietly, stayed briefly, and then vanished without a trace. A traveler with no warning, no trail, no promise to return. You imagine yourself floating beside it, not stopping it, not catching it, but simply watching as it moves through the solar system on a path no comet or asteroid has ever followed. Its orbit is hyperbolic, not an elongated loop, but an open curve like a brushstroke that begins far away and disappears into the void again. It came not from within, but from beyond, from a place beyond the pull of our sun, from another star, perhaps from another time, maybe a place where light moves through different skies, where gravity follows familiar rules, but curves in unfamiliar ways. Scientists name it Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word that means a messenger from afar, arriving first. And how fitting that is, for this is the first time anything like this has ever been observed, a true interstellar visitor, something born beyond our solar neighborhood, now passing through it in silence. You feel the shape of the mystery form around it, like mist, soft and slow, because Oumuamua is not just a rock, it is a question made of motion, a puzzle written in light. Its brightness changes rapidly, suggesting that it tumbles chaotically end over end. Unlike the lazy spin of most space objects, it turns erratically, as though it has no balance. Anchor, as though it is no longer held by the forces that once shaped it. It reflects sunlight in strange ways, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, as if it is long and thin, perhaps like a shard or a blade or a sliver of something broken or made. It has no visible tail, no coma, no cloud of gas that would mark it as a comet, and yet it moves in a way that does not fit an asteroid. Either its speed, its path, its silence, all point to something that doesn't belong among our familiar space rocks. You wonder how long it traveled before it reached us, how many years, how many centuries, how many stars it passed by unnoticed. Did it drift through dust clouds? Did it cross the gravity of unseen planets? Did it carry with it the marks of impact erosion, the faded fingerprints of time worn smooth and silent? Maybe it spun quietly in darkness for 1,000 years, before light finally found it here in our corner of the galaxy. And what brought it this way? Not by aim, not by guidance perhaps, but by chance, a soft drift nudged by stellar tides, until it entered the pool of our sun, curving slightly as it passed, and then slipping away again beyond where we can follow. The moment of its detection was brief, a snapshot already fading. Astronomers scrambled to observe it, to measure it, to hold on to a thing that was already leaving ground. Telescopes, space observatories all turned to watch it go, trying to read its shape from flickering light, trying to hear its story from silence. But the object told us little. It gave only what could be seen from distance, a few weeks of observation before it grew too faint, too far. Its message, if it had one, was quiet, unfinished. And now, as you drift beside it in thought, watching this lonely traveler sail into darkness, you feel something familiar and ancient, the deep, quiet curiosity that arises when the unknown passes just close enough to touch and yet remains unreachable, the sense that you've glimpsed something not just strange but rare, perhaps even sacred, not because it explains something, but because it asks something. What else moves through the night sky, unseen? How many visitors come and go without our notice? How many messages pass through the dark while we sleep? And if this Was the first then what waits beyond the edge of sight? What other travelers lie just outside the curve of our understanding, waiting to drift into view? And as Oumuamua fades from the warmth of our sun and slips back into the cold distance, you remain suspended with the question still glowing faintly like starlight in your thoughts, ready to follow it further as the mystery deepens with a name that holds more than sound and a silence that carries the weight of stars. Not yet reached. There is something deeply human about the way we name what we do not understand, something ancient and instinctive, as though placing a name upon a mystery helps shape it within the soft architecture of our thoughts. And so you drift now into the moment when this visitor from the stars is given its name, not with urgency, not with noise, but with care and wonder, a name chosen not only to identify but to reflect the spirit of what was seen and felt. It is a name offered by those who scan the skies from an island where the heavens meet ocean with sacred clarity. The astronomers at the University of Hawaii call it Oumuamua, and as the syllables roll gently across your tongue, you feel how the word itself carries meaning shaped by tradition and reverence. A Hawaiian name for a thing from beyond, Oumuamua, translates as a scout or a messenger from afar, arriving first. A name that does not explain or solve but honors the moment and the mystery it carries. And in this naming, something shifts. The object becomes not just a blip on a telescope, not just a celestial anomaly, but a story, a character in the unfolding tale of cosmic exploration. And you imagine the scene now, a quiet room filled with murmurs of uncertainty, researchers gazing at their screens at curves of brightness and motion, trying to trace the object's path backward through time, through gravity, through space, wondering where it came from and what nudged it toward us. And as they ponder, they decide that if it is to be remembered, if it is to be studied, if it is to be held with care, it must be named, and that name must echo the truth of its motion, the truth that it came from somewhere else, not from within, not from us, but from the outside, from the vast beyond of interstellar space, where stars are born and die, where planets form in clouds of dust, where time stretches differently and memory fades more slowly. Oumuamua does not belong to the family of comets that loop the sun, nor to the bubble of asteroids that circle in belts. It is a wanderer, untethered and unknown, and its name holds that wonder like water in cupped hands. You feel how this name wraps around the object like a soft shell, a way for the mind to hold something that cannot be touched, and you understand how powerful that act can be, to name without knowing, to call it not what it is, but what it means, a messenger, a scout, not because we know what it says, but because it speaks in presence, in arrival, in the mere fact that it came at all. You imagine yourself standing beneath the wide sky of Hawaii, where the name was chosen, where ancient traditions of stargazing stretch back through generations, where the stars were not just distant points, but truth's companions to travelers, guides to fishermen and wanderers. The name Oumuamua emerges not just from science, but from a deep reverence for the heavens. It speaks of arrival, but also of motion, of the idea that this is not the last, this is the first, the beginning of something new, a new class of objects, a new category of visitor, perhaps even a new era in astronomy. And yet the name is quiet, not declarative, not arrogant. It whispers, it watches, it waits, and in that quiet you feel the pull of deeper questions. Who sent this messenger, and what message does it carry? Does it mean to speak, or is it simply drifting without intention, a silent stone in a cosmic stream? Its shape remains unknown, its origin uncertain, but its name allows you to think of it with familiarity. It becomes something you can follow, something you can wonder about without needing to grasp it completely. And perhaps that is what names are for, not to control, but to accompany, to walk with us as we try to understand the things that move through our lives and through our skies. You drift alongside the syllables of Oumuamua, hearing the way they echo against the walls of your thoughts, feeling how the sound of the name makes the object feel both real and mythic, a bridge between knowledge and mystery, between motion and meaning. And in this gentle space between stars and language, you begin to feel the weight of what it means to witness something first, to see it not fully but first, and to name it not for what it is but for what it brings. The quiet shock of something new and yet ancient, something that reminds us that the universe is wider, stranger and more poetic than even science alone can hold. And as this chapter closes, you feel the name lingering not just in your ears but in your thoughts, a sound that carries forward into the next question, into the search for what this visitor is made of, what it might be made from, and how its strange shape reflects a history we can barely begin to trace. And so you follow its turning path, gently into the next layer of the mystery, wondering what we find when we try to see what cannot be seen, and name what cannot be held. You drift gently now into the delicate space, where science tries to describe the indescribable, a place where names and labels reach their limits, and all that remains is something that doesn't quite fit anything known. You float beside, watching it turn slowly in the silence of the stars, and though the data streams in from observatories around the world, it becomes clear that this object, this visitor, does not want to be understood through simple comparison. The scientists try. First, with what they know, they ask, is it a comet, one of those icy travelers from the outer reaches of the solar system? And yet, there is no tail, no shimmering coma, no outgassing that would reveal melting ice, no soft trail left behind as it passes through sunlight, just the object itself, quiet, dry and unyielding. So they ask then, is it an asteroid, a rock forged in the ancient birth of planets, solid, heavy, tumbling through space, without change? But again, it resists the definition, for though it seems rocky, it behaves strangely. It spins far too quickly and irregularly, as though its mass is uneven, its shape elongated beyond anything common, and it reflects light in ways that confuse the instruments. Sometimes bright, sometimes faint flickering. Not with rhythm, but with a tumbling unpredictability. It does not spin smoothly. Like a top, it flutters like a falling leaf, and you imagine yourself drifting beside it, watching this motion that defies precision, feeling how this object refuses to settle into a category. It becomes not just puzzling, but deeply humbling, because everything we've seen before, everything we've catalogued from comets to asteroids to space, debris has followed patterns, has matched something we already knew, but this does not. This moves like a fragment of something broken, or like something intentionally shaped, something with an origin story, unlike any we've written, and yet it gives so little away. It does not break, it does not glow, it does not emit radio signals or shine in new wavelengths. It just is. It spins, it drifts, it fades, and the astronomers grow quiet as they realize they are not just observing, they are witnessing the limits of language and classification. Some propose it is a piece of a shattered planet from another solar system, thrown out by gravity in a distant catastrophe. Others suggest it may be the fragment of an interstellar comet, whose icy parts long since evaporated, leaving only this strange dry husk. Still others whisper of more speculative ideas, an alien probe, a derelict sail, a manufactured object flung through the stars. And though most dismiss these with caution, they do not dismiss them entirely, because Oumuamua does not behave like anything we've seen, and its mystery opens the door to all possibilities. You float through this discussion, not as a judge, but as a listener, hearing the minds of science struggle gently with uncertainty, not with frustration, but with awe, because here in the presence of the unknown, the familiar tools feel small, and yet the wonder grows, and still the question lingers. What is it? It is not a comet, it is not an asteroid, it is not a satellite or a piece of junk, and its speed is not just fast, it is precise. It is too fast to be bound by the sun. It is moving fast enough to escape, forever to never return, and this speed, combined with its trajectory, tells a story of origins. Far beyond our system, it came from somewhere else, not as part of a loop, but as a passerby, a guest, perhaps uninvited, but impossible to ignore. Its motion is a message, not in words, but in geometry and momentum, and when scientists trace back through space, they find it came from the direction of the constellation Lyra, but beyond that the trail grows cold to many stars, too much time, and so again the object resists a clear origin. No home, no match, no reason, and the discussion circles again. If it is not what we know, then what is left? What is the shape of something entirely new? And here you feel the quiet power of science, not in having answers, but in being willing to ask again and again, to observe with open eyes and patient hearts, to hold uncertainty without fear. You imagine Oumuamua spinning through that uncertainty, like a whisper through a crowd of thoughts, not announcing itself, but simply being different, and the world watches as it grows dimmer and dimmer, until it is no longer visible through even the most powerful telescopes, and yet its presence lingers. In the equations, in the diagrams, in the collective breath of the scientific community, who now must add a new column to their charts, a new row to their tables, a new question to their understanding. You feel the stillness of this moment, as if the universe has dropped a single pebble into the wide, calm lake of human knowledge, and the ripples are just beginning to reach shore. Not a comet, not an asteroid, not what we know, and yet undeniably something that came and moved and left behind a story we're only beginning to write. And as you float gently in the wake of this story, you feel how much remains open, how every failed label becomes a new invitation to look again, to ask differently, to imagine what else might drift between stars. unrecognized, unlabeled and unseen, and with that gentle realization, you begin to wonder what kind of motion could carry such a thing, what sort of push could guide an object across light years, what forces might be at work just beyond what we can detect. And this is the question that leads you softly into the next mystery, a question of how it moved, and whether it moved only by gravity or by something else, something lighter, subtler, something like a sail opening in the wind of starlight itself. Now you follow the way it moves, not just where but how, because movement tells a story, even when no words are spoken, and Oumuamua moves in a way no ordinary object should. It does not loop, it does not settle, it does not fall into the great gravitational arms of our sun as all the other celestial travelers do. Instead, it slices through space like a message delivered, and already retreating, you float along its path, tracing the curve that led it near the sun, and then away again, never pausing, never turning, just a single arc carved across our solar system, a motion not of orbit but of passage, not of belonging but of transition, and you realize this movement is not the echo of something pulled in, but the signature of something visiting it. Speed alone tells a story faster than any natural rock from our system could travel. It came in hot and fast and left just as quickly on a trajectory so steep, so sharp. It becomes clear this object is not bound to the gravity of our star. Its orbit is hyperbolic, its path forever open, never closing upon itself, never to return. It is not circling, it is slipping away, and this matters because it is rare, profoundly rare for something to enter our solar system from interstellar space, and even more rare for us to notice it. As it passes through, we live in a quiet corner of a vast galactic ocean, and Oumuamua is like a drifting plank washed up for a moment on the tide, and then pulled back out to sea by the currents of something far older and wider than we can chart. And yet, for that brief time we had it here, a glimpse of motion from beyond, and the scientists watch this motion with a kind of reverence, because in the shape of its path is the shape of its story, a story that challenges the tidy models that have served for so long. They plot the curve, measure its acceleration, run simulations, and the numbers reveal something strange. As it left the sun, it sped up, just slightly more than gravity alone would allow. Not wildly, not with drama, but with just enough push to raise questions. A soft acceleration, as though something was nudging it from behind, like a feather catching a breeze or a sail, opening quietly to light. And this is where the mystery deepens, because comets sometimes accelerate like this, pushed by jets of evaporating ice, but Oumuamua has no tail, no sign of outgassing, no visible material to explain the push it leaves behind, no mist, no stream, no shedding of mass, only the faintest change in speed, a motion so gentle it is almost a suggestion. And so the scientists begin to consider other possibilities, perhaps radiation pressure, the subtle force of sunlight itself, pressing against the object like wind on a sail. Could it be shaped in such a way to catch that pressure, thin, flat, elongated, like a sheet or a fragment or a crafted structure? Not randomly broken, but intentionally formed, not natural in the usual sense, but made by something or someone. And though these ideas drift toward the speculative, they arise because the movement of Oumuamua demands them, its refusal to follow expected paths, its lack of visible exhaust, its smooth acceleration, all hint at something we have not seen before. And as you float alongside this moving enigma, you feel the tension between doubt and wonder, between the desire for explanation and the openness to mystery. Because motion, this elegant, this quiet, this precise, feels like a language unto itself, and if you listen with your thoughts, you can almost hear the syllables of that silent story playing out in the arc of its flight, like a stone skipping once across the vast lake of the solar system, before vanishing into the darkness. Again, not falling, not circling, not staying, just visiting with the quiet grace of something shaped by time and space in ways we have not yet imagined. Perhaps it was sent, perhaps it simply wandered, perhaps its shape is accidental and its path inevitable, but the way it moves remains what? It is smooth, untroubled, elegant and evasive, and this motion becomes more than a fact. It becomes a feeling, a presence, something you can sense but not hold. And as you breathe deeply now, you let the image settle in your mind, a long, thin object turning, slowly pushed, not by fire or ice, but perhaps by the softest forces of light, drifting, not in chaos but with calm deliberation, moving not because it must, but because it has moved for a very long time. And in this image you begin to feel the gentle gravity of the next question: what shape must it be to move like this, and what story is hidden in that shape? What memory held in the form of something unlike any rock or fragment we have seen before? What does it look like to spin in such a way, to shimmer in such strange rhythm? And so you float forward now toward the next unfolding of this mystery, the question of its body, the way it reflects, the way it spins, the way it shows itself, and yet never fully reveals, and you carry with you the silence of its path, and the quiet realization that even without a voice, even without a signal motion, itself can be a kind of message waiting to be understood. You drift now closer, not in distance, but in thought, toward the object that spins without sound or certainty, an object whose shape is not known but guessed at. From shadows that never quite form, you imagine trying to hold it in your mind, not with hands but with patience, with light and time, because that is all anyone has had to work with, the way it dims and brightens, the way the sunlight glints off its surface unevenly, erratically, as though it were long and thin, as though it were tumbling, not rotating but tumbling end over end like a stick thrown into the wind. You picture that motion now, slow and clumsy and unpredictable, not because it is careless, but because it may be relic-like, broken or ancient or shaped in ways we do not yet understand. And as you float beside this vision of motion, you begin to see the picture form not in clarity but in contrast, a sense of shape without surface, of mass without outline. Scientists have tried to imagine it from the light alone, tracking how it reflects, how it dims and flares, how its brightness changes over hours, suggesting an elongated form, some say at least 10 times longer than it is wide, more like a shard than a sphere, more like a needle than a stone. And this is unusual because nothing we know in nature spins like this. Nothing we know from our own solar system takes this shape, not comets, not asteroids, not even fragments of debris. The proportions seem exaggerated, unnatural, not impossible, but unfamiliar, and in that unfamiliarity, the mystery grows. The brightness curve is dramatic. The way it rises and falls as it spins through sunlight suggests not a smooth body but something jagged, something sharply edged, something that could be a fragment of something larger perhaps, torn or carved or left behind by an older force. You consider now whether it could be hollow perhaps, a shell or a sail. Something so light it moves with ease, so responsive that even the faintest push from sunlight changes its course. This theory is raised by some who look at its acceleration, the gentle shift not explained by gravity alone, and wonder if it is not a rock but something more deliberate, a structure, a craft, a vessel. And yet others insist that nature can surprise that unknown. Forces in distant systems may break things differently, shape them in unfamiliar geometries, and you rest between those ideas, not choosing but observing, not deciding but allowing the possibility that what we see may be both familiar and foreign, that nature and intention may sometimes look the same from far enough away, and so the shape remains undefined, a suggestion, a silhouette, without shadow, because we never see it directly. We only see how it plays with light, how it catches and throws brightness in patterns we strain to interpret. Some models imagine a cigar-shaped object, long and narrow. Others suggest a disc flat, like a pancake, spinning and flaring as it turns. Both would explain the data, both remain unconfirmed, and you begin to feel the weight of what it means to describe without seeing, to know only through inference, only through flickers in the telescope. And yet the image becomes no less real, no less powerful, because it is incomplete. That imagination breathes. Scientists recreate its possible shape using computer models, adjusting the spin and size until the light curve matches what was observed, and these simulations become like dreams, informed by numbers, yes, but still dreams. Visions of what might have passed through our system unnoticed if not for a sliver of sunlight catching the right place at the right time. And now you wonder how much we miss, how many other shapes, without shadow, pass through without detection. How many other travelers leave no visible mark, no reflection to trace, no light to catch. And this one, we noticed only briefly. It stayed in our skies for just a few weeks, bright enough to measure only 4 days, and then it faded, moving too fast to be followed, too strange to be understood. And yet it changed something. It introduced a new kind of object. Not because we captured it, but because we failed to fully define it, and still it asked us to try. You imagine the object tumbling now out, beyond our reach, spinning in silence through interstellar dark, far from any star, now cold perhaps, dormant perhaps, never alive, and yet carrying with it the memory of that moment of observation, the moment when it passed close enough to reflect the light of our sun, and to reflect also the light of our curiosity. And here you linger on the thought that the shape we assign it may never be the truth, only a story. We tell to make sense of its visit, and yet in that story something beautiful takes form: a shard, a sail, a disc, a shard again, each possibility. A new poem, each model, a quiet act of wonder. You imagine if it were truly flat, if it moved like a leaf floating in the stream of sunlight, pushed gently but meaningfully across the sky, not because of its mass, but because of its surface, and the way it interacts with light, a kind of cosmic origami, folded by time or intention. You imagine if it were long and thin like an antenna, like a whisper stretched into geometry, spinning awkwardly because it no longer belongs to any gravitational anchor, and each thought becomes a way to hold the unholdable, each vision a step deeper into a mystery that resists being solved. And so you return to the shape as a question, not as an answer, a question cast into darkness, a form that invites imagination, not as escape, but as a tool to consider what else may be drifting through the void, unrecognized, unnoticed, unimagined. And as you breathe slowly, resting in the presence of this silent shape, you feel that it is not only a thing, it is a threshold, a boundary, between what we know and what we almost know, between what we see and what we sense. And as Oumuamua spins away from our reach, its strange proportions disappearing into the starless dark, you carry with you the feeling that its shape, though unseen, has changed the shape of your thoughts, and you begin to wonder if something so strange in form might also move in ways we do not expect, if the lightness of its body might allow it to dance with forces subtler than gravity, to respond to pressures most objects would ignore. And this is the question that will carry you softly into the next chapter, the question of what moved it, not just where it went or how it turned, but whether it was pushed not by accident but by something faint and constant, something like sunlight, something like intention, something like a whisper on the wings of light. Now you rest with the question that rises not from noise but from absence, not from what we see but from what we don't, from the silent push that seems to nudge Oumuamua as it leaves our solar system, a gentle acceleration, soft as a breath, almost beneath notice, and yet persistent enough to disturb the neatness of gravity, because things that pass the sun should slow down, they should drift away in a graceful curve, their motion shaped by the sun's invisible pull. And yet Oumuamua does something different. It speeds up just slightly, as though something pushes it from behind, not in sudden bursts but with a steady whisper. And you drift beside it now, in that whisper, wondering what it means, what could move something in the emptiness of space without gas, without fire, without visible force. And the first answer would be a comet, a body of ice that heats and releases gas as it nears the sun, jets of vapor acting like thrusters, creating just enough push to shift the path. But this object shows no signs of that, no tail, no mist, no release, just its strange silent movement. And so you let that possibility fall away, like mist itself, evaporating into the dark, and instead you consider another force, one that is everywhere, and yet rarely noticed: radiation pressure, the force of sunlight itself. Because light, though weightless, carries momentum, and when it touches a surface, it transfers a whisper of energy, a push so slight we never feel it here on Earth, but in space, where there is no resistance, no friction even, that tiny push can change a trajectory. And so you imagine the sun not just warming, not just illuminating, but pressing with gentle fingertips against the body of Oumuamua. And perhaps that is enough. But it would only be enough if the object is light enough, if it is thin enough, something broad and flat like a sail, something that catches light the way a leaf catches wind. And this idea begins to take shape in the minds of some, not just metaphorically, but physically. What if Oumuamua is a solar sail, a real object designed to travel by light alone, a thin sheet, perhaps metallic or composite, large in surface, small in mass, riding the radiance of stars across the interstellar dark, and you float beside this possibility, not claiming it, not proving it, but feeling its beauty, the way it aligns with the motion, the acceleration, the lack of outgassing, the way it explains everything with a kind of elegance. And that's where imagination begins to blur with speculation, because if it is a sail, who made it, who sent it, and when did it begin its journey? And perhaps it was not sent at all, perhaps it was abandoned, a relic of a civilization long gone, or long distant, drifting, silently powered only by the light of whatever stars it passed. Or perhaps it was a fragment torn from something larger, once part of a structure, now alone, wandering through space with no purpose but inertia. And even if it is natural, if shaped by collisions or conditions we do not understand, the way it moves still carries meaning, still speaks to a design that we have not seen before, because nature too can sculpt what seems deliberate. And still you wonder if the acceleration, is truly from light or something we have not yet guessed, some unknown interaction, some forgotten corner of physics, some new force that touches only the smallest, most delicate travelers, or perhaps the measurements are wrong, perhaps the data shifts with error, but even that cannot erase the question, was it pushed, and if so, by what and why? You return again and again to the image of light itself, as a force, not just illumination, but motion, the same light that warms the earth, that fuels life, that paints shadows, also moves this visitor with silent determination, and you feel now how gentle that motion must be. How patient, how continuous, as though Oumuamua has been listening to starlight for years, using it as a guide, using it as wind. And this makes you think not just of what it is, but of what else might be moving that way quietly, and unnoticed objects that do not burn or roar, but drift slowly, powered by light alone. And you think of how we on Earth have dreamed of building such things, sails that catch sunlight and carry probes to distant stars, the breakthrough Starshot project, the dreams of scientists who wish to send messages across light years, using sails thinner than paper with beams of light as their engine. And you feel the symmetry of that dream and this mystery, two ideas, touching in the dark, one imagined, one observed, and maybe they're the same, or maybe not, but in that overlap something stirs, something opens, and you begin to realize that even if Oumuamua is not a sail, even if it is not crafted, its motion still matters, because it shows us what to look for, how to look for it, what signals lie in motion, what stories hide in speed and drift. And now, the object is gone far beyond reach, moving still faster than the sun can hold, and we will not see it again, not this one, not this time. And yet, its question remains spinning through the silence. Was it pushed, and how softly, and by what, and what other forces move through space, unnoticed? What other sails may be drifting between stars? What other relics may be slipping past our gaze, catching the light, but not the eye? And as this thought carries you gently into rest, you find yourself wondering if perhaps the real message was not in the object itself, but in the push, in the idea that even light can move. What is quiet, even a whisper, can change a course, and what feels small might be the most powerful force of all. And now that this visitor has passed, and the ripples of its motion have faded in our telescopes, you are left with another kind of whisper, one that asks, what would it mean if it were made, if it were built, if someone shaped it and sent it? And that is where your thoughts begin to drift toward next. Not the motion, but the meaning, not the force, but the intent, not how it moves, but why it was made, and whether anything else out there is watching us in return. Now you find yourself in a quiet space between two thoughts, between certainty and curiosity, between the comfort of the natural and the shimmer of something else, something other. And this is where the question begins, not loudly, not with suspicion, but softly as a whisper among scientists, as they study Oumuamua's motion, its shape, its strange acceleration. They begin to wonder, not with conclusions but with caution. What if it isn't natural? What if its form, its behavior, its silence all suggest not randomness, but intention? You drift beside that idea, letting it unfold without resistance. You imagine an object made, not by gravity but by design, something shaped, not by collision or erosion but by purpose. And though no one declares it outright, the idea finds voice in a 2018 paper from Harvard, in which two astrophysicists proposed that Oumuamua could be a probe, a light sail, a technological artifact from another civilization, sent or drifting, perhaps no longer active, perhaps a relic, but still real, still crafted. The suggestion sends ripples through the scientific world, and while many push back, preferring to explore natural explanations, the question lingers, because this object simply doesn't behave the way it should, not like a rock, not like a comet, not like anything else we've tracked. And so you sit with that possibility, not as belief, but as wonder, because the shape, the speed, the spin, the acceleration all point away from familiar patterns and towards something that might be unique, and uniqueness always draws the eye. It always asks to be held a little longer in the mind. Perhaps it is natural, yes, perhaps the result of tidal forces on a long-forgotten planet, a fragment ejected during formation and sculpted over time into its strange elongated form. Perhaps radiation pressure shaped its speed, not intention. Perhaps the absence of a cometary tail is just due to the loss of volatile materials long ago. And yet, even as you hold those possibilities, you cannot ignore the elegance of the alternative, that it is built not by us, not for us, but by someone else, somewhere else, a messenger from a civilization advanced enough to shape an object that rides starlight across galaxies. And you imagine what that might mean to build such a thing, not for speed, but for endurance. not for noise but for silence, a craft that needs no fuel, no signal, just light and time and distance, moving quietly through the stars, waiting perhaps to be seen, or perhaps not. Perhaps it is debris ancient and discarded adrift for millennia, now caught in the current of the sun, unnoticed by chance. Or perhaps it is like one of our own Voyager spacecraft drifting endlessly, long after its makers are gone, carrying echoes of knowledge in silence. The idea humbles you, not with fear but with perspective, because if it were made, then we are not alone, and even if we never learn who made it, even if we never hear its voice, its presence would be enough to shift the way we think about space, about life, about time. But even if it is not made, even if it is purely natural, its strangeness still matters, because it reminds us that the universe is more inventive than we imagine, that nature too can create the uncanny, the unclassifiable. The borderline and that edge is where we learn most, where questions bloom and certainty dissolves. You remember how the astronomers tried to model its shape from the changing brightness, how they argued whether it was a shard or a disk or something else entirely, how none of the models fit perfectly, and how that imperfection itself became part of the puzzle. It is not easy to say what is natural when our sample size is one, when no other interstellar object had been observed before, and so every assumption stretches a little further than it should, trying to fill gaps with patterns that may not apply here. And this is the real gift of Oumuamua, not just its presence but its challenge. It resists closure, it resists being filed away into a neat category, and because of that it forces science to stay open, to widen its lens, and you drift with that widening, letting your mind wander through the possibilities. Not because you expect aliens, but because expecting only the expected would have made us blind to this object in the first place. And as you float in that openness, you consider how little we know about what drifts between stars. The space beyond our sun is vast and cold and dark, and if something does travel between systems, it would need to be resilient, silent, unobtrusive, and perhaps that is why we did not see others before. Perhaps they came and went unnoticed, and only now are our eyes sharp enough, our surveys deep enough to catch the glimmer of something different. And now we know how to look, now we know what questions to ask. And that is the legacy of this object, whether natural or not. It has expanded our curiosity and deepened our attention, and this is what science does best. Not prove, but invite, not close but open, and you rest in that opening, letting the mystery be enough. For now you do not need answers, only the honesty of asking, and the patience to keep looking, and you begin to wonder if silence itself might be the message, if the lack of signal, the absence of clear intent might still carry meaning, might still be part of what it means to send something through space. And so you let the question remain unresolved. Could it be built? Could it be sent? Could it be seen as more than an object, more than an accident, more than a shape? You watch it fade, now past our reach. Not because it hides, but because it keeps moving, and your thoughts move with it, toward the space it left behind, the space not of stars, but of silence, the long trail of what we don't know. And in that silence, a deeper story waits, perhaps not in the object itself, but in our reaction to it, in the way it made us pause and wonder and reconsider and ask not only what it was, but what it meant. And as you float gently forward, with that quiet question still warm in your thoughts, you begin to feel the pull of the next part of the story. Not about what it was, but about what it left behind. A story not told with words or signals, but with absence, a story that echoes not in noise but in silence, and that silence is where the next chapter begins. Now you sit with the silence, the kind that does not settle but lingers, a silence that feels not empty but full of questions, full of wonder, full of a strange stillness that remains long after the object itself has vanished beyond our sight. You recall how it came unannounced, appeared in the telescope's field, as if it had always been there, just waiting to be noticed, and then just as quickly it was gone, its speed too great, its path too steep to linger long in our company. Took the answers we had hoped to ask. There was no signal, no sound, no transmission to catch, no trace of intelligent touch, only movement, only light, only the quiet shifting of an unknown shape in a known sky. And now that it has passed you, find yourself listening for something that isn't there, not because it never was, but because it was never meant to stay. You float, now, in the quiet sky, where it once passed through, retracing the trail it left behind, a trail not made of dust or fragments or light, but of questions that refuse to dim the same way. Its brightness once flickered in telescopic views, and it occurs to you that some stories are not written with words or matter, but with absence, with the hush that follows. after with the shape of what's missing, and that may be the story Oumuamua gave us, not by intention, not by design, but by being exactly what it was, a visitor without explanation, a guest who offered no greeting, no warning, no farewell. It came, and we looked and it left, and the silence it left behind became the canvas for all we imagined it might be. Scientists watched as it faded, measuring the last hints of sunlight. It reflected, tracking it, until it was too far, too faint, too lost to reach again, and they kept listening long after it vanished, listening for a ping, a pulse, a whisper across radio waves, hoping perhaps, foolishly, that it might speak back. But space stayed quiet, the deep radio silence unbroken, just as it had always been, and that quiet began to mean something, not disappointment, not failure, but something else, something harder to name. The silence became a kind of presence, a stillness that asked us to stop and wonder, to feel not just the object but the space it moved through and left behind, because there are moments when the absence of a thing becomes its message, when what isn't said becomes the loudest part of the story. And so you sit with the quiet, asking, what does it mean for something to come so far and leave so little behind? And the answer, if there is one, might not lie in the object itself, but in the way it changed us, the way it made us see differently, think differently, listen more closely. We had never seen anything from another star so clearly before, never watched a traveler arrive and depart on a path so unmistakably interstellar, and that alone changed something. It made the cosmos feel more connected, more alive, more capable of surprising us with visitations not born of theory or fiction, but of real motion across real space. And though we do not know where it came from or where it will go next, its path now lives in our maps, a line carved across the solar system, a curve that began in the unknown and continues into the unseen, and you feel that motion even now, a gentle arc sweeping out into darkness, as though the universe itself is breathing through it, quietly, steadily, slowly. And in that breath you sense the story not told with detail but with gesture, the way a hand might move in the air to describe something too large to hold. And that is what Oumuamua became, not an answer but a gesture, a movement through our knowing that left room for not knowing. And that too is a kind of story, the kind that leaves space for the listener, the kind that becomes a mirror, reflecting not the traveler but the ones who watched it pass. And you think about how quickly we turned to theories, how we tried to fit it into what we understood or wished for, how we named it, how we modeled it, how we debated it, and still the silence beneath all that talk remained undisturbed, holding its own shape, its own kind of truth. Because maybe the story isn't about what it was, maybe it's about how we react when something won't let itself be defined. Maybe that's the deeper echo, the one we hear now as we lie back and look up and wonder what else has passed us by, unseen and unrecorded, and what we might notice next time. And this too becomes a kind of listening, a listening that does not expect noise but respects silence, that waits not for answers but for the chance to ask again, because that's what this object left us, not facts, not conclusions, but the space to keep wondering, the silence to fill with new questions, and in that space a new kind of science, a slower, more open kind of attention begins to grow, one that includes dreams and doubt and even the possibility that some stories end without resolution. And you rest now in that idea, feeling how it settles over you gently like stardust, the understanding that not everything that arrives will explain itself, and not everything that moves will return. And you wonder what it means to receive something that gives nothing and yet leaves so much to hold. And as your thoughts drift further into the quiet that follows you, begin to sense that the silence of Oumuamua is not the end of its story, but the beginning of ours, the beginning of a deeper listening, of a readiness to see and question and follow. And perhaps the next time something passes through, we'll be more prepared, not with answers, but with attention, because this one came and left behind the trace of something that feels more like invitation than mystery. And now you begin to think not just about what we saw, but what we learned, not just about it, but about ourselves and what we choose to believe, what we choose to wonder, what we choose to keep watching for. And that is what carries you softly forward into the next chapter, a question not of silence but of understanding what we've gathered from what was left behind, and how the mystery that passed through us will shape the way we see from now on. Now you begin to gather the pieces, not of the object itself, for it has long since vanished into the dark, but of the thoughts it left behind, the questions it raised, and the reflections it sparked. You sit with the traces, the measurements, the flickers of brightness, the shape inferred but never seen, the motion recorded but never touched. And from these fragments you begin to feel the outline not of a rock, but of a shift in how we look, in how we ask, in how we listen, because our passed through our solar system like a breath barely caught, and yet in that moment it changed something. It reminded us that the sky is not still, that space is not quiet, that the universe is not a closed loop, but a corridor where visitors might still arrive unexpected and unexplained. And this was not just another asteroid, not just another comet. This was something new, something first, and firsts always teach, whether they explain or not. And so we learned from the shape, or rather the absence, of a clear one. We learn that elongated objects, perhaps 10 times as long as they are wide, can tumble through space and fool our models. We learn that brightness can shift, not just with surface but with spin, with material, with unknown textures. We learned that reflection is not always a clue, but sometimes a curtain, a veil between knowing and assuming. We learned from its motion to its hyperbolic arc, revealing its origin from beyond the sun's grasp, its soft acceleration hinting at forces subtle and quiet, perhaps sunlight itself, perhaps something we haven't named. And in that gentle push, we saw a new kind of motion, one that requires us to consider not just gravity, but light as a mover of things, as a shaper of paths. And we learned from its silence, from the absence of a signal, the absence of heat or vapor or dust. We learned that not all travelers speak, not all visitors leave footprints. Some pass through and vanish, and teach us to pay attention to the empty spaces they leave behind. We learned from the theories too, from the way minds reached out and bent around the mystery, some suggesting a sail, some a shard, some a relic from another system, some a crafted artifact, each theory a mirror, showing more about us, about what we hope, what we fear, what we're willing to imagine. And in that imagination, science stretched, not in fantasy but in courage, in the courage to ask not only what it was, but what it might mean. And that perhaps was the most important thing we learned, that science is not just answers but questions, and not just questions but the willingness to sit with them. When no answers come right away, we learned how to be still, how to look longer, how to reframe the unknown as an invitation rather than a problem. And that lesson echoes now in the way we scan the sky differently, in the way we build our instruments, in the way we talk about possibility. Because once we saw an interstellar object, once we noticed it in time to measure it even briefly, we began to understand that there may be more visitors, more fragments, more whispers drifting between the stars. And now we are ready, or at least more ready than before, with new surveys like the PRC Rubin Observatory, with new missions that might one day intercept such objects or catch them on their way in. And all of that came from one moment, one curve, one light shift. And so Oumuamua became a kind of teacher, not because it gave us facts, but because it left us thoughtful, because it left us reaching. And that is a kind of learning more lasting than any simple answer. And so you gather these learnings, not in your hands but in your thoughts, like stardust, soft and weightless but meaningful. You feel how each idea changes your sense of space, how each mystery deepens your sense of wonder, how each missing piece makes the picture feel wider, not smaller. And you begin to realize that this visitor, strange and silent, became a kind of mirror, not showing us itself, but showing us our own readiness to wonder, our own capacity for awe, our own willingness to sit with the unknown and hold it gently. And in that gentle holding we grew, we became more open, more imaginative, more careful, more awake to the quiet things, the brief things, the unshaped things that still matter. And you feel that growth, not as noise but as stillness, a kind of calm that says, yes, we don't know, but yes, we are listening, and yes, we are learning. And so you float now in that space of quiet learning, thinking not just of what we saw, but of what it means to look, of what it means to say we don't know, and still care deeply of what it means to ask again and again, with no promise of reply. Because that is what this story has become, not a solved puzzle, but an open path, not a destination, but a beginning. And you trace that beginning now back to the moment of detection, back to the first flicker, back to the telescope image, back to the feeling that something had arrived, something different. And you realize that the most profound discoveries are often not the loudest, not the clearest, but the ones that make us look again and keep looking, the ones that change our eyes. And you feel now how Oumuamua did that, how it reset the lens, how it softened the certainty, how it brought humility into the room and left it there like a light still glowing long after the object had passed. And you hold that glow now as the chapter closes, a soft understanding that the lesson is still unfolding, that the next mystery might already be on its way, and that what we learned from the first will shape how we greet the second. And now, as your thoughts drift into the quiet sky, you begin to wonder not just what was revealed, but what still hides, not just what we saw, but what we missed, and what questions remain for the silence to hold. And from that wondering rises the next and final thought, the gentle mystery that all endings carry with them. What if this is only the beginning? What if the universe has more messengers waiting just beyond the light? And now you find yourself floating once more, not forward, not backward, but gently suspended in the stillness that lingers when the story slows. The stars are quiet, the space is wide, and the questions remain open, not to be solved, but to be held with care, as you return to the thought of that silent visitor that moved through our solar system like a breath barely heard. You remember its arc across the sky, its shifting brightness, its quiet exit, and all that it did not say. And it is here, in this moment of calm, that you begin to feel the deeper truth, that some things are not meant to be answered quickly, that the universe is not a puzzle to be completed, but a kind of ocean always in motion, always offering more than we can carry. And that Oumuamua, this silent fragment from another star, was less a riddle and more a reflection, a momentary mirror in which we saw not just an object, but the edge of our knowing, and beyond that edge, something vast, something unfinished, something gently waiting. You drift now in that space beyond certainty, watching as the trails of data and speculation fade into soft outlines, and questions remain not because they were missed, but because they are still unfolding. And this is the beauty of science, when it is quiet, when it does not rush, when it listens as much as it speaks, when it allows space for mystery to be part of the process and not a flaw. And so you rest within that process, now remembering what was seen, but also noticing what was not seen, what was never captured, what was never proven, and yet still mattered, still moved, something within us we never touched. Oumuamua, we never resolved its shape or origin or meaning, we never heard it speak, we never saw it return. And yet its passing shaped how we see, shaped how we listen, changed how we imagine what is possible. And still it drifts out there somewhere, into deeper cold, into longer dark, untouched, unchased, carrying with it not answers, but presence. And presence can be enough, a presence that continues to move even now, even in our absence, even beyond our measurements. And this is what remains, the unknown, the gentle, unclothed door, the thread that dangles just out of reach, asking not for conclusion, but for patience, for reverence, for curiosity without pressure. You wonder now, how many more are out there, silent travelers slipping between stars, carrying stories we don't yet know how to hear? And how many have passed before, unseen, unmeasured, unremarked? And how many will come again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps not for 1,000 years? And still you wait, still you watch, still you listen, because something in this story reminded you that watching is enough, wondering is enough, dreaming even without resolution is still worth the drift. And so the chapter does not close, it softens like the light of a distant star, fading slowly, not into darkness, but into depth, into stillness, into the idea that the more we learn, the more there is to learn, that each discovery opens into a new sky of questions, and that the silence left behind by Oumuamua is not empty but full of paths not yet followed, full of thoughts not yet formed, full of stars not yet seen. And you feel that now in your breath, in the rhythm of your thoughts, slowing into sleep, into peace, into a kind of knowing that accepts not knowing, a kind of comfort in the unfinished, the unresolved, the unseen. And that too is science, not just the gathering of facts, but the quiet respect for the space between them, the willingness to stay still long enough for wonder to arrive, softly, unannounced, just as this object did, just as the future will again. And so you float now in the long, gentle ending, not an answer, not a farewell, but a continuation, a drifting into the vastness that began with a flicker of light and ended not in knowledge but in awe. And as your eyes begin to close and your mind quiets into stillness, you carry with you not the shape of the object, but the shape of the question it asked, and all the quiet questions it left behind, not as burdens but as gifts, not as riddles but as invitations. And somewhere far beyond this quiet, your thoughts drift alongside it, still moving, still tumbling, still unknown, and still enough